Andrew Vaughn further cemented his Milwaukee folk hero status, and the White Sox got nothing to show for it by giving up on him. Or maybe they still can.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan. I've been podcasting here for over a year and a half and covering the team well before then. And also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Andrew Vaughn hit a huge 3-run home run last night for the Brewers, and he'll probably never have to pay for a drink in Milwaukee again. However, I got one more bar he must clear before you can really say the White Sox are going to miss him. Then let's go over some candidates who can replace Ethan Katz as the pitching coach. And finally, I'll get to your mailbag questions and comments. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. All right, so I acknowledge I'm moving the goalpost. I acknowledge I'm probably doing some mental gymnastics. I also acknowledge the White Sox clearly lost the Andrew Vaughn trade because Aaron Civale was only with the White Sox for a few weeks. He pitched terribly, and the White Sox waived him, and the Chicago Cubs picked him up. And really, this is just more of an exercise of mitigating just how much did the White Sox lose this trade. Because right now, it looks terrible. It does. Andrew Vaughn has gone on to be the best version of himself in the Brew City, but there is a potential mitigant that the White Sox could still save a little bit of face, and that is addition by subtraction. And you might be like, well, Todd, why can it be addition by subtraction? Andrew Vaughn has hit much better since going to Milwaukee. Well, there's still some bars he has to clear in 2026. I mean, moving on from Vaughn, even though Aaron Civale flamed out, could end up helping the franchise in the long run because you're no longer going to have to deal with these April and May slumps he always had. Because basically here was the vicious cycle. Slump in April and May, get hot in June, then do just enough the rest of the season to maintain replacement level play. And for the Milwaukee Brewers, that's fine. In 2026, if he's, even a 1 F4 guy next year, that's fine for them because that's what they just need out of first base. But for the White Sox, he was supposed to be a featured bat in the lineup. You can't have replacement level play. You can't have hardly any power at first base like he gave. So by getting him off the roster, the White Sox can at least try to find better overall production at the position or explore at least a better power option at first base until they can finally identify a long-term solution. Now, I also acknowledge his revival will always speak to just how players thrive once they leave the South Side, which is another thing you would like to see this rebuild accomplish this time, that they can actually develop players who thrive here and then keep them here at 35th and Shields. Let's try to avoid needing to trade players for either the fact that you have to multiply assets or you're trading them because it's a change of scenery aspect. Like you're giving up, you're done, you're out, which the White Sox clearly were. And look, the White Sox gave Andrew Vaughn a fairly significant runway. And they gave him a whole lot of leeway after basically kicking out a franchise legend in Jose Abreu. Mitigating factor, he only had one more productive season left anyway. But still, they gave everything to Andrew Vaughn after he was willing to give the White Sox some help. Remember, he played left field and right field terribly, by the way, but just to get his bat in the lineup, he was willing to do certain things. But the White Sox clear out Abreu. They give him the first base job and nothing. Honestly. And I was an Andrew Vaughn truther. I was a card-carrying member of the Andrew Vaughn Truther Club. So in some ways, I'm fine seeing him thrive in Milwaukee. I mean, that 3-run home run he hit last night was just majestic. It was majestic in how far he hit it, and it was majestic because he wiped out the Chicago Cubs 3-0 lead. And for example, I was hearing it from my Cubs fans friends after the Cubs go up 3-0. And I don't know why Cubs fans always feel the need to involve White Sox fans And also, yes, I am a Brewers fan too. It's my second team, but why they have to jump on? It's like, it's the first inning. Like, yeah, a 3-run home run is more backbreaking than, say, a solo shot. Like on Saturday when I saw that solo shot and Cubs fans were like, oh, here we go. I'm like, it's a solo home run. You can overcome solo home runs in the first inning. 3-run home runs in the first inning, yeah, that can be tough. But there's Vaughn. Boom. Hitting a home run. And you see Sox fans jumping in. See, we should have never let him go. Got to remember, that was his first home run since mid-August. And he also hits lefties well. And this season, he had an 859 OPS. But I'll give you, to the Vaughn truthers, a little bit of a nugget. He has, the 14 home runs he hit this season, 11 came off of righties. So, it's a nice story that he's having a revival because, again, he never pouted here. And I honestly think he's going to thrive better when he doesn't have to be the man in the lineup. I just don't think he was comfortable being that guy, being the dude that we all thought he was going to hopefully be when they took him number 3 in the 2019 draft. I had to get off being a truther because I just grew tired of the slow starts. I grew tired of him likely never reaching his all-star ceiling because, like the reports are, when he was slumping, I remember a television broadcast, John Triffin even saying, well, Vaughn's not worried because he knows he's eventually going to hit. Yeah, he would eventually hit, but only in June. So I got off the bandwagon after enough data got to me where it's like, yeah, we got to move on. And for Brewers fans, I got to warn you, he still needs to clear that he can be truly the best version of himself by hitting in April and May next year. Now, maybe playing, half of his April and May games in a roof stadium will help. But he is a career 218 hitter in the first month. And then he's a career 239 hitter in May. Then his career numbers jumped to 292 in June. Now, maybe even if he has that repeating factor in Milwaukee next season, the Brewers, with their stacked lineup, they can survive him starting the season in a slump like he always does. But for the White Sox, a slump like that usually means you're losing 100 games because that's happened the last 2.5 seasons when he was with the White Sox. The Brewers can hide him in the lineup. The White Sox, they couldn't hide him. He was expected to be a featured bat. And his struggles helped expose one of the many issues with their offense. And we've also seen the end results of him struggling as a featured bat. I mean, you actually saw the offense produce more this season once he was removed from it. You got, the same amount of home runs overall that Andrew Vaughn, just Lenyn Sosa and Miguel Vargas playing first this year, and keyword first, they hit 13 home runs combined. Vaughn had 5 for the White Sox this season and 14 overall on the year. So the platoon of Sosa and Vargas pretty much provided the same amount of power. Now, when you only have 18 home runs at first base, that screams, go get an upgrade. But the other question is would Vaughn be this version of himself had he stayed in Chicago and returned to the roster in July, like when the Brewers eventually brought him up? I'd say maybe you would get at least that hot streak like he always does, but I still think he eventually comes back to earth. Whereas at least in the Brewers, yeah, he didn't hit a home run until, yesterday, but he did have a pretty solid September hitting wise too. It's just, he's a supporting cast player, not a foundational member. And that speaks to how the previous rebuild just completely overvalued and completely overestimated player ceilings. Well, the White Sox are looking for a new pitching coach. Let's go over some ideas of who could replace Ethan Katz, and that is coming up after the break. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And I love Monarch Money because it helps me track my investments in my 401k and Roth IRA. As you know, I would like to retire someday. My wife loves Monarch Money because it makes doing the budget so easy and less stressful. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONMLB. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe at wherever you get your podcasts. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. And also make sure to check out my written content at SouthsideSox.com, part of the SB Nation, on TapSportsNet.com, and at the Fan First Sports Network. All right, so Jordan Lazowski of Sox on 35th, he had a great piece recently listing out who could potentially replace Ethan Katz as the team's pitching coach. I respect Jordan's opinion on who could be a pitching coach, considering he's been a pitching coach for area code teams, those teams that teams sponsor to, for baseball, high school baseball prospects, basically a showcase league so that they can scout them. He's been on those, so he at least, has a lot of credibility when it comes to pitching, in my opinion, at least at the development level, that type of stuff. So he's got a piece out on SoxOn35th.com that I suggest you read. And I'm just going to go over the candidates, he at least, if you don't have time, because I think he brings together some interesting candidates. And he mentions two internal candidates because of the team's connection to Brian Bannister. And the reason why I bring that up is I do want to still see this be a collaborative effort between Will Venable, Chris Getz, and Brian Bannister on who should be the pitching coach. But by all accounts, it sounds like one of the reasons why the White Sox moved on from Ethan Katz was because Will Venable probably wants his own guy. And we can argue that, well, Bannister is the director of pitching. You got this infrastructure, and he worked well with Ethan Katz. And Ethan Katz did have some decent communication with the bullpen and work with the bullpen. I did point out, though, how terrible they were at high leverage. And, hey, if Will Venable is supposed to be the true partner of Chris Getz when it comes to building the team and then leading the team, Chris Getz should lean more than to what Will Venable wants. And if Will Venable thinks, what, it's just I'm not seeing players get as good as I want them to at the big league level, and I feel like I can bring in some of the guys that I'm familiar with to help them get better at the big league level because, again, we're in phase 2 of the rebuild, and phase 2 is now internal improvement, then, yeah, you should afford him that. But you still shouldn't disregard Brian Bannister because, again, he's influencing what is the overall pitching strategy within the organization, meaning guys are, being taught how to pitch and what they're doing pitching-wise all the way down at the complex league up to the big league club. And that's why I think it should be a collaborative effort. So here are some of the options he gives, and I'll give a few nuggets on why, and then just kind of my reaction. So the first one he goes over is Matt Zaleski, the pitching coordinator of Chicago White Sox. This is what just a quick nugget. I don't want to give it away. You should read the whole thing. Let's start with a couple of internal options. Zaleski, 43, was a popular name even back when Ethan Katz was first hired by the White Sox heading into the 2021 season. He served in a variety of roles for the Southsiders, including some time in the dugout as their AAA pitching coach, but has settled in as pitching coordinator over the past few seasons. Zaleski has been with the White Sox in a coaching capacity since 2016. And this one I can see happening if Venable does like his work, because, again, you've got the connections to Brian Bannister, but, what's the relationship that Venable has to the work that Zaleski is doing? All right, this is another internal candidate. Scott Aldred, pitching coach, Charlotte Knights, the second internal option on this list. Aldred, 57, has a long coaching resume that would make him an appealing option. His first season with the White Sox was in 2025 after previously spending 6 seasons as the Marlins minor league pitching coordinator. Before that, he coached for 14 years within the Yankees organization, spending most of their time as a AAA pitching coach from 2009 to 2015. I like that he's come from outside the organization before having to navigate basically coaching pitching in Charlotte, because, pitching in Charlotte is definitely hard, as I've suggested. So if he was just been there the entire time, I'd be like, I'd rather go with the AA guy. But Lazowski also hints this could be a hire considering, given that the White Sox are likely to look for someone who aligns philosophically with Brian Bannister, the fact that the organization brought Eldred in this season speaks volumes about his fit and philosophy. He's also a former player, which we've seen matters to Getz. Whether or not the White Sox feel he's ready for a dugout opportunity at the big league level remains to be seen, but it's hard to find a more complete resume without big league coaching experience. All right, so then Lazowski goes with J.P. Martinez, pitching coach, San Francisco Giants. As mentioned, Martinez's time overlapped with Bannister in the organization, so this could be a relationship manager chooses to continue on the South Side. While it isn't clear how interested the White Sox are or if Martinez would be allowed to explore opportunities elsewhere, it's worth keeping an eye on him with his combination of results, experience, and ties to Bannister. And again, this one I could see possibly being the move, but again, Venable is going to have to rubber stamp it because you're making the move based on the clear ties to Bannister. And, especially where Bannister had a lot of success when he was with the Giants. All right, then you got Pete Mackay. I'm going to butcher that name. I'm sorry. Pitching coach, Minnesota Twins. One thing of note has been the attention put on the buy-in among all the Twins pitching coaches to the team's organizational pitching philosophy, working in concert with the front office. This sounds similar to the situation that Mackey would be walking into with Bannister running the show. So if their philosophies can align, Mackey would present another opportunity to bring someone into the fold with recent success in that role. And just maybe the White Sox can learn something about the division in the process. At the very least, Mackey should garner an interview on his resume alone. Interviews are free, remember. I know the White Sox technically got away with that when they were doing the GM search, but it can't hurt to interview this guy. Fully agree. Jared Hughes, the coordinator of pitching performance, Los Angeles Angels. He's yet to coach within the dugout, so the White Sox would certainly be taking a risk here. However, Chris Getz and Will Venable have shown that they value coaches with major league playing experience, so Hughes fits that description. If he and Bannister can align on a pitching philosophy that works for the team, perhaps the White Sox would be prepared to take a chance on a first-time big league coach. Sorry, I don't want any more former Angels coaches. Unless it's Ron Washington as a director of fielding, I don't want any more former Angels coaches, so sorry. Casey Jacobson, assistant pitching coach, Chicago Cubs. It's worth noting that Will Venable's time with the Cubs overlap with Jacobson's albeit just one season, but his connections with the organization are worth calling out here. This isn't to diminish the work Jacobson has done, as he earned consideration for this role on the back of the body of work he's put together. As is the case with all the names on the list, if he and Brian Bannister can get on the same page philosophically, it appears the White Sox should have no concerns about his ability to communicate with players and put an organizational philosophy into practice at the highest level. And again, this is where you would have to get to the collaborative rubber stamp from Bannister if it happens, because at least you have somewhat of a relationship with Will Venable there. All right. Dave Bush, assistant pitching coach, Texas Rangers. Not much has been published about Bush's philosophies, but it's worth noting that his time in Boston briefly overlapped with Bannister, and his time in Texas also overlapped with Venables. His big league experience would also likely be seen as a positive for the White Sox. Although Lazowski pointed out, his time in Boston did not have the best results because, when he was with Boston, that's not when their pitching was at its strength. But this could be a guy that you do get the agreement with Venable and Bannister. And Dave Bush, I can tell you, I covered him when he was with the Brewers. He is a stand-up guy. He was always accountable. He was also he wasn't a velocity guy, so he had to do a lot of spin. So he really learned how to pitch. And he won the first playoff game for the Milwaukee Brewers since 1982 when he won Game 3 in 2008. So I think this might be a guy that you definitely want to take a look at. And then Lazowski points out Trent Blake. He's the director of pitching strategy for the Seattle Mariners, but he's pretty much in the same role as Bannister. So, you're not sure, does he want to sit in the dugout? Jim Henderson, the assistant pitching coach for the Milwaukee Brewers. Again, this would be tapping into the ties that you basically have with bench coach Walker McKinnon. And it can never hurt to grab a Brewers pitching coach. Mark Lowy, the assistant pitching coach for the Philadelphia Phillies. Lazowski's logic is just tap into great organizations. So those are kind of the names that he threw out there. If you want more on why he did that, again, go to SoxOn35th.com. Well, it's Tuesday, so let's go over your mailbag questions and comments after the break. There's nothing like catching a baseball game live. The energy, the crowd, the chance to see your team in person. But actually getting tickets, that's the tough part. Queues, login screens, surprise fees. It takes all the fun out of it. That's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Gametime is fast, easy, and backed by the Gametime guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. Think about it. Fees are included, so you're going to know your total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And how many times have you thought, hey, I'm going to get a great deal to this show, to this sporting event, to this performance, only to get to the checkout and see that deal vanished under a pile of fees? Well, that doesn't happen at Gametime. And honestly, Gametime is faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcast, as this show's available on all major podcast platforms. All right, so it's a mail call on a Tuesday. Like I said, I'm going to be doing, your mailbag questions or comments. I'm going to try to aim for every Tuesday, but I'm going to try to get you a guest at least once a week. So sometimes recording, Monday into Tuesday, or that works best. So you're just bank on the mailbag segments usually being on a Tuesday. Sometimes I'm going to move it to Thursday. But I got 3 that I want to address, with one asking about an upgrade at first base that I would not be opposed to. So this is from my guy, Brian. He emails me. I ran this by my cousin. I'll toss it at you about giving Pete Alonso 3 years, $100 million. He's 31 now. Many times needs a DH first baseman. So, I would love it, especially if it's just at 3 years. 3 years at $100 million, sign me up. However, it's a pipe dream, as the White Sox are not handing out that much money this offseason. I'm going to get to the money that they might have to spend in just a second as I address another listener's, another everydayer's comments. And I would love, I know somebody are like, well, he's 30, he's going to be 32, but I would love to have his 38 home runs in the lineup, and I would love to have his 5 straight seasons of 35 or more home runs. And I'm focusing on the home runs. I just want him to hit a lot of home runs. This isn't Adam Dunn where, when they signed him, you were signing him for the on base and the home runs. Just give me a lot of power from the left side, and don't make too many errors at first base. And trust me, I would love for the White Sox, again, I talked about it in the first segment, try to find an upgrade if you can, because you only got 13 home runs at first base, or 18 home runs if you add in, and then I took out the 4 home runs from Tim Elko. So you got 21 home runs. You want more home runs at first base. It's a power position. I would also love Josh Naylor at first base, because again, I just don't want to see. If anything, I would like him to stop destroying White Sox pitching. And we've seen him hit a lot of bombs at right field. But I just get the feeling you're going to get Ryan O'Hearn on a 1-year deal based on his ties to Ryan Fuller when they were both at Baltimore. Well, this is a comment from at Don Berta 8640. He commented yesterday, and I did press, but this is the one I want to talk about. Payroll is expected to be reduced from what I've been hearing, and goes up after next season. And, he's saying where he was hearing. I asked him, where did you hear that? He was like, well, MLB, TV. Okay. And you can go to the episode page. It's yesterday's, I think, about the conversation. But I think what everyone is missing, and I don't mean to be, downgrading or, kind of condescending. I'm trying not to be condescending, but what I think everybody is missing when it comes to Jerry Reinsdorf, and because I see it in the comments, and I want to make sure that you guys can comment, but I also want to just be like, guys, Jerry's only going to be here for 3 more years. And even if he did reduce payroll even slightly, they're still going to have money to use in the offseason, because they're only projected to have about $42 million in payroll commitments before you even get to the rookie renewals. Okay, MLB Trade Rumors just put out the arbitration projections, and it's $3.4 million for Mike Tauchman, $1.5 for Steven Wilson. Then you got the $20 million option for Luis Robert Jr. that whether you agree with it or not, it's going to get exercised. And $17.1 million for Andrew Benintendi. That's $42 million, plus you need to allocate just about $10 to $13 million for rookie renewals. Last year, the White Sox had way more players ARB eligible. They had $6 million they had to put aside just for Andrew Vaughn. You don't have to put just for one player, it was $6 million. You only have to put away $4.9 million for two players. And technically, you could easily walk away from Steven Wilson. He doesn't scream that you have to bring him back. So I think it was like $8 or $9 million that they had to pay. So it's just, we got to understand. They have $42 million. And then let's say the rookie renewal. So let's say they got to put, like I said, it's usually the rookie salary is $780K. So what, 11 to 15 guys probably going to be on the roster on rookie deals, before arbitration. So you got to allocate about 10 to 13 million for your rookie renewals. Okay. That's still $55 million at the high end. And I doubt they're going to walk into next season with just a $55 million payroll. That would be criminal. Even if they want to give guys an opportunity, as what this commenter said, you still have to put a supporting cast around the young core to at least help them win. So even if they got at least $20 million to use, even if it was just another $79 million payroll, you're going to have $20 to $24 million at your disposal. And all I was saying on yesterday's show, for example, is maybe grab a starter that's worth more than Martin Perez's $5 million that you gave him. 3.5 for the salary and then the $1.5 million buyout that you're going to pay him this season, and maybe a better bullpen arm or two. That's all I was saying. And then Aiden, we9359 on YouTube commented, when constructing a baseball team, a bullpen and DH are last. Again, I feel like, I'm not trying to be condescending, but I feel like some are missing what I'm trying to communicate here is, yes, I agree. You don't really ever want to spend that much money on the bullpen until Justin Ishbia is the owner, and then he's hopefully giving you an unlimited budget. But what I'm saying is you can make the exception this offseason, get a couple of guys on 1-year deals or 1 year and an option deal that you can flip at the trade deadline. Because this team, is likely not going to contend next year. Even if they duplicate what the Marlins did and have a great second half and finish, sort of in the race conversation, they still finished under 500 and they still sold off at the deadline. It's going to be another sell year. And I keep advocating then, take advantage of the seller's market for bullpen arms. Contenders want bullpen arms at the trade deadline, and they will pay a premium price to get those bullpen arms because a lot of teams keep seeing more and more. You want to get Shohei Ohtani out in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning, and you might need that Shohei Ohtani stopper, for example. That's why even though the Padres didn't get past the Cubs, if they did, they wanted Mason Miller, for example. They wanted other guys to line up against some of those big bats. And that's what teams are willing to say, you know what? We'll pay to upgrade our bullpen at the deadline because it just costs us prospects that we don't know about. And right now, if the White Sox go into the trade deadline next season, they don't have much to sell. That's going to give you viable prospects that you can build around. You got Luis Robert Jr.'s potential, but contenders have basically said they're only paying pennies on the dollar. And I don't know if Mike Tauchman's going to give you a huge return. So all I'm saying is you can make the exception to leverage for more assets by signing some bullpen help this season. Plus, they can at least, say you get Devin Williams. You use him to help in high leverage and close if he can bounce back for the first couple of months. That's going to help this young core learn how to win. And then you trade him off and you bring in somebody from your system to replace. That's all I'm saying, guys. I get the exercise, but you can make exceptions. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night until a World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube, wherever this is your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow to discuss if a White Sox fan who is anti-Cubs should actually be more anti-Wisconsin sports and pick the Cubs over the Brewers. I'm going to talk about that with Fitz of the Barroom Network. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion on the episode page on YouTube via email, lockdownwhitesox@gmail.com, or you can leave them at X, formerly Twitter, at LockedOnSox or at ToddJW. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube or leave a 5-star review at wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.